I found my pregnant daughter left for dead in a freezing ravine, her body half submerged in mud that was rapidly turning into a grave. Her skin was blue, her breath shallow, and the white maternity dress she wore was stained a terrifying crimson. When she finally opened her eyes, she did not ask for a doctor. She did not ask for help. She grabbed my wrist with a grip so cold it burned, and she whispered 5 words that would burn down an entire dynasty. It was my mother-in-law. She said my blood was dirty. That was the moment Winston Graves, the gentle retiree, died, and Winston Graves, the forensic auditor, returned. They thought they were discarding trash in the woods. They did not know they were declaring war on a man who knows how to bury entire fortunes. Before I tell you how I took everything they owned without throwing a single punch, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit like and subscribe if you believe family is about loyalty, not just DNA. The rain in Virginia does not wash things clean. It just makes the dirt heavier. That night, the sky was not just raining. It was trying to drown the world. My flashlight beam cut through the deluge like a fragile blade shaking violently in my hand. I am 67 years old. My knees ache when the humidity rises and my eyes are not what they used to be, but panic has a way of erasing age. I had tracked her phone to this edge of the conservation forest, a place where the prestigious Sterling estate met the wild, unforgiving woods. I slid down the muddy embankment, tearing my trousers, ignoring the sharp rocks slicing into my palms. I smelled it before I saw her, the metallic, undeniable scent of blood mixing with wet earth. Zoe lay at the bottom of the ravine, curled in a fetal position, protecting her stomach even in unconsciousness. My beautiful Zoe, the architect who designed libraries, the girl who never raised her voice. Now she was a broken doll discarded in the mud. I fell to my knees beside her, the water soaking through my pants instantly. I touched her cheek. It was ice cold. I checked for a pulse. It was there, but it was fluttering like a moth trapped in a jar, weak and erratic. I pulled her head onto my lap, shielding her face from the downpour with my body. Zoe, baby daddy is here. I choked out my voice, lost in the roar of the wind. Open your eyes. Please. Her eyelids fluttered. They were heavy drugged. This was not just a fall. I have seen trauma before. I spent 30 years investigating fraud, often uncovering the violent crimes rich people commit to hide their money. I know the look of a victim who has been silenced. She looked up at me, but her eyes were unfocused, swimming in pain. Daddy, she wheezed. The sound was wet. I am here, baby. I am going to call 911. No, she gasped, her fingers digging into my forearm. No police. They know the chief. They will finish it. The fear in her eyes was more terrifying than her injuries. She was not afraid of dying. She was afraid of being found by the people who did this. That was when she pulled me closer, her lips brushing my ear, forcing the words out through the agony. Constance. She pushed me. She said my blood was dirty. She said the baby would pollute the legacy. The rage that hit me was not hot. It was absolute zero. It froze my tears. It froze my panic. It clarified the world into a single sharp focus. Constance Sterling, the woman who smiled at the wedding, the woman who ran the charity foundation, the woman who had just tried to murder my daughter and unborn grandson because of the color of our skin. I did not scream. I did not howl at the moon. I simply nodded. I wrapped my arms under Zoe's knees and shoulders. I am an old man and Zoe is 6 months pregnant, heavy with life. But adrenaline is a powerful drug. I lifted her. I screamed internally as my lower back seized, but I stood up. I climbed that muddy slope, one agonizing step at a time, slipping, sliding, but never letting go. I would have carried her across the ocean if I had to. I reached my old Buick parked on the service road. I laid her across the back seat, covering her with the wool blanket I always kept in the trunk. I did not call 911. Zoe was right. The Sterlings owned this town. The police chief played golf with Constance every Sunday. If I called them, they would turn this into an accident. They would say Zoe was unstable. They would control the narrative before she even reached surgery. I got into the driver's seat and locked the doors. My hands were covered in my daughter's blood. I gripped the steering wheel so hard the leather creaked. I started the engine and peeled onto the main road, not toward the county hospital, but toward the city 40 miles away. I drove with the cold precision of a man balancing a ledger. I did not speed recklessly. I did not run red lights. I could not afford to be pulled over. I was a black man in a battered car with a bleeding woman in the back. I knew exactly how that headline would read. As I drove, I pulled out my phone. I dialed a number I hadn't used in years. Dr. Marcus Evans. He ran a private clinic that catered to athletes and people who valued discretion. He was also the man whose medical school tuition I had saved from a predatory loan shark 2 decades ago. Marcus, I said when he answered. I am 10 minutes out. I have a trauma case. Pregnant female, 28 years old. Blunt force trauma to the abdomen and ribs, possible hypothermia. And Marcus, this off the books until I say otherwise. Winston. Is that you? What happened? Just open the back door. I said, my voice devoid of emotion. And get the trauma kit. I hung up. Then I sent one text message. It was to my brother Luther. Luther, who operated in the shadows of the shipping industry. Luther, who had offered to break the legs of Zoe's first boyfriend when he made her cry. I typed 3 sentences. Found her in the woods. Constance Sterling did it. Activate Grandpa's rule. I threw the phone onto the passenger seat. Grandpa's rule was simple. It was something our grandfather, a man who survived the Jim Crow South, taught us. When they come for your life with fire, you do not bring water. You bring a shovel and you dig the ground out from under their feet until they fall into hell. Zoe groaned in the back seat. I glanced in the rearview mirror. Hold on, baby. We are almost there. I am sorry, Daddy, she whispered. I should have listened. I thought she changed. Shh. Save your strength. I pulled into the alley behind Marcus's clinic. The rain was still hammering down, washing the mud off the Buick's tires. Marcus was waiting with a gurney and 2 nurses. They didn't ask questions. They saw the blood on my shirt and the look in my eyes, and they went to work. We got her into the private trauma room. The lights were blindingly bright after the darkness of the woods. I stood in the corner, dripping wet, shivering now that the physical exertion was over. I watched them cut away her muddy dress. I saw the bruises blooming on her side, dark purple and angry. I saw the ultrasound machine roll in. Is there a heartbeat? I asked. The room went silent. Marcus moved the wand over her belly. The silence stretched for 10 seconds. 10 seconds that felt like 10 years. Then a sound. Whoosh, 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 whoosh. Faint, fast, but there. The baby is in distress, but the heart is beating, Marcus said, his voice tight. She has 3 broken ribs, internal bleeding in the abdominal cavity. We need to stabilize her before we can even think about surgery. Winston, what the hell happened? Before I could answer, I saw the reflection of blue and red lights flashing against the clinic's rain-streaked windows. My heart stopped. How I hadn't called them. I walked to the window and peered through the blinds. A sheriff's cruiser was pulling up to the front entrance, and getting out of the back seat protected by an umbrella held by a deputy was Constance Sterling. She looked impeccable. Not a hair out of place. She was wearing a trench coat that probably cost more than my car. Beside her was Garrett, my son-in-law, looking pale and useless. They tracked her phone, I realized. Or maybe they tracked mine. Winston, Marcus said urgently. The police are at the front desk. They are demanding to see the patient. I looked at my daughter unconscious on the table. Then I looked at my hands. The blood was drying, turning brown. I walked over to the sink and turned on the tap. The water ran cold. I scrubbed the mud from my face. I washed the blood from my fingers. I looked in the mirror above the sink. The predator stared back at me. The eyes were too sharp, the jaw too set. That man would scare the police. That man would get arrested. I closed my eyes and exhaled a long, shuddering breath. I let my shoulders slump forward. I relaxed my jaw until my mouth hung slightly open. I widened my eyes to let the fear and confusion show. I summoned the arthritis in my knees and the tremor in my hands. When I opened my eyes, the predator was gone. In the mirror stood a terrified, confused, poor old man who was overwhelmed by tragedy. A victim. Let them in, I said to Marcus, my voice trembling perfectly. I just want to know why my baby fell. I was ready. Constance thought she was coming to finish the job, to take control of the narrative. She thought she was walking into a room with a broken old man. She didn't know she was walking into a cage with a wolf wearing a wool coat. The game had just begun. The automatic doors of the private clinic slid open with a soft hiss that sounded like a snake preparing to strike. The atmosphere in the sterile waiting room shifted instantly. It was no longer a place of healing. It had become a stage, Constance Sterling did not just walk into a room, she invaded it. She was flanked by two uniformed officers who looked less like law enforcement and more like her personal honor guard. Beside her was Garrett, my son-in-law, looking pale and small in his damp designer sweater. He kept his eyes fixed on the linoleum floor, unable to lift his head, unable to look for the wife he had failed to protect. But it was Constance who commanded every ounce of attention. She was wearing a trench coat that cost more than the house I grew up in, and her face was a mask of perfectly curated devastation. I watched from the corner, slumping my shoulders, making myself look smaller. I saw the performance begin. Constance brought a trembling hand to her mouth. She let out a choked sob that sounded heartbreakingly real to everyone except me. To the nurses and the police officers, she was a grandmother terrified for her unborn grandchild. To me, she was a predator assessing the damage to her property. She rushed toward the intake desk, her heels clicking a sharp, authoritative rhythm on the tiles. "Officer," she gasped, clutching the arm of the burly deputy beside her for support. "Please tell me she is alive. My poor, unstable Zoe. We tried so hard to get her help. We knew the prenatal depression was getting worse, but we never thought she would try to harm herself like this." The words hit me like physical blows. Unstable, depression, harm herself. In 3 sentences, she had rewritten reality. She was not the villain who pushed a pregnant woman into a ravine. She was the saintly matriarch dealing with a mentally ill daughter-in-law. The police officer patted her hand gently, his face soft with sympathy. "We are doing everything we can." "Mrs. Sterling," the officer said, his voice lowered in reverence. "The doctors are with her now. We need to wait for his statement, but given her condition, we understand if that is not possible right away." Constance nodded bravely, wiping a non-existent tear from her cheek. She turned, scanning the room until her eyes landed on me. For a fraction of a second, the grief vanished. Her eyes were hard, cold flints of gray stone. There was no sadness there, only annoyance. It was the look one gives a stain on a silk rug. She whispered something to the officer, and he nodded, stepping back to give us space. She walked toward me, Garrett trailing behind her like a shadow. As she got closer, the sobbing stopped completely. Her posture straightened. She stopped 2 feet away from me. She smelled of expensive lavender and old money. "Winston," she said. Her voice was low, smooth, and devoid of any warmth. It was the voice she used to fire maids. "I am surprised you are here. I would have thought you would be halfway to the state line by now." I looked up at her, keeping my eyes wide and watery. I let my hands tremble visibly. I did not speak. I knew that if I opened my mouth, the rage would pour out and I would end up in handcuffs. "Where is she?" Constance asked, glancing at the closed doors of the trauma unit. "The doctors are working," I stammered, forcing my voice to break. She is hurt bad, Mrs. Sterling." "Good," she said. The word was so quiet I almost missed it. Then she sighed, a sound of exaggerated exhaustion. "Look at you, Winston. You are soaking wet. You are muddy. You are making a mess of this private facility. Honestly, it is embarrassing." She stepped closer, invading my personal space. This was a power move. She wanted me to flinch. She wanted me to step back. I stayed rooted to the spot, letting her think I was paralyzed by fear. "You know," she continued, her voice dripping with fake sympathy that was sharper than any insult. "I told Garrett that mixing bloodlines was a mistake. Zoe is a sweet girl in her own simple way, but she is weak. She does not have the constitution to be a Sterling. And now look, she has brought this drama to our doorstep. Suicide attempts, police reports. It is so very tacky, Winston. She was testing me. She was goading me. She wanted me to scream. She wanted me to attack her right here in front of the police. If I raised a hand, if I even raised my voice, she would have me arrested for assault. She would paint me as the violent father of the unstable daughter. It would be the final nail in Zoe's coffin. I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted copper. I looked at Garrett, hoping for a spark of defiance, a moment of manhood. He just stared at his shoes, picking at a loose thread on his sleeve. He was broken. She had broken him long ago. Constance reached into her purse. It was a black crocodile skin Hermes bag. She pulled out a wallet that looked like it held more cash than I had seen in a decade. She didn't pull out a card. Also, she pulled out a single crisp $100 bill. She held it out to me, pinching it between 2 manicured fingers, as if the money itself was dirty because it was about to touch my hand. "Here," she said. Her voice rose slightly, just enough for the officers nearby to hear the tone of benevolence. "Go get yourself cleaned up, Winston. Take a taxi home. You have done enough for tonight. We will handle Zoe's care from here. The Sterling family has the best specialists on retainer. We do not need outside interference." She waved the bill in front of my face. It was not a gift. It was a dismissal. It was a dog treat. She was buying my disappearance. She was buying my silence. She was telling me that my daughter's life, my grandson's life, and my own dignity were worth exactly $100. The officer near the door watched us with a small, approving smile. He saw a wealthy woman helping her daughter-in-law's poor father. He saw charity. He did not see the knife she was twisting in my gut. My hand reached out. My fingers were rough, calloused, and stained with the mud from the ravine where she had left my daughter to die. Her fingers were soft white and flawless. As I took the bill, our skin brushed. She flinched, pulling her hand back as if she had touched a hot stove. She pulled a silk handkerchief from her pocket and wiped her fingers right in front of me. "Disgusting," she muttered under her breath. I looked at the bill in my hand. Benjamin Franklin stared back at me. I could rip it up. I could throw it in her face. I could scream the truth that she was a murderer. But I was a black man in a private hospital in Virginia standing in front of a white woman who owned the police chief. The truth would not set me free tonight. The truth would get me killed. To defeat a monster, you must first survive the monster. I took a deep, shuddering breath. I let my shoulders collapse. I lowered my head until my chin touched my chest. I forced the predator deep down into the cage in my soul and locked the door. "Thank you, Mrs. Sterling," I said, my voice loud enough for the room to hear. "Thank you for your kindness." Constance smiled. It was a terrifying expression. It was the smile of a hunter who has just realized the prey has no teeth. She turned her back on me, dismissing me completely. "Officer," she called out, walking toward the trauma doors. "I demand to see my daughter-in-law. I need to make sure she is being transferred to a proper facility." The officer nodded and held the door open for her. Garrett shuffled after her, not daring to look at me as he passed. I stood there for a moment, the $100 bill crumping in my fist. The police officer who had been watching walked over to me. He placed a heavy hand on my shoulder. "She is a good woman," the officer said. "You should be grateful. Go home, old-timer. Let the family handle this." The family. They were the family now. I was just the old-timer. I was the inconvenience. I nodded at the officer. I turned and walked toward the automatic doors. I walked out into the rain. The water was still falling in sheets, cold and relentless. I walked to my battered Buick. I sat in the driver's seat, the darkness of the car wrapping around me like a shroud. I looked at the clinic entrance. I saw Constance talking to the doctor through the glass doors, gesturing wildly. She thought she had won. She thought she had bought me off. She thought I was a broken old man who would go home, drink cheap beer, and cry about his bad luck. She had made the classic mistake of the arrogant. She judged the book by its worn-out cover. She didn't know she had just handed $100 to the best forensic auditor on the East Coast. She didn't know that by taking that money, I had just accepted the first piece of evidence in the case against her. I smoothed out the bill on the dashboard. I took a picture of it with my phone. Then I started the car. I didn't go home. I drove 2 blocks away and pulled into the shadowed parking lot of a 24-hour diner. A black SUV with tinted windows was already waiting there. I parked beside it. The window of the SUV rolled down. Luther was there, his face grim, illuminated by the glow of a laptop screen. "She is inside," I said into the darkness. "She thinks I am gone. She thinks I am harmless." Luther looked at me. He saw the fire in my eyes that Constance had missed. "Good," Luther said, his voice like gravel. "Invisibility is our greatest weapon, brother. The camera in the teddy bear is live. I have eyes on the room." I looked back toward the clinic one last time. "Enjoy your victory lap, Constance," I whispered, "because you just invited the devil into your house and you didn't even check his ID. I put the car in gear. The old Winston Graves was gone. The hunt was on. The sterile hallway of the private clinic smelled of floor wax and quiet desperation. I sat on a hard plastic chair, my damp clothes clinging to my skin like a second uncomfortable layer. I watched the clock on the wall tick away seconds of my daughter's life. The doctors were still behind those double doors. The silence was heavy, but it was about to be broken by the shuffling footsteps of a coward. Garrett Sterling walked toward me. He did not walk like a man whose wife was fighting for her life. He walked like a child who had broken a vase and was trying to hide the pieces before his mother came home. He stopped a few feet away from me, his Italian leather shoes squeaking faintly on the linoleum. He looked at me, then looked away, unable to hold the gaze of the man whose daughter he had failed to protect. He was 28 years old, the same age as Zoe, but he had the softness of someone who had never worked a day for his survival. His hands were shaking as he reached into his blazer pocket. "Winston," he started, his voice cracking, "we need to talk about the future." I looked up at him slowly. I let my mouth hang open slightly, maintaining the mask of the confused, overwhelmed old man. I did not speak. I let the silence force him to fill the air. "Look," he continued, gaining a little false confidence. "Mother and I have been talking. This situation with Zoe, it is tragic, really, but we have to be realistic. This environment, the stress of the Sterling lifestyle, it is obviously too much for her mental health. That is why she jumped Winston. She could not handle the pressure." He paused, waiting for me to argue, waiting for me to scream that she did not jump, that she was pushed, but I stayed silent. I rubbed my hands together nervously, looking down at my muddy boots. "We think it is best if Zoe goes back to live with you," Garrett said, rushing the words now. "Back to her roots, far away from here. Once she is stable, of course." He pulled a checkbook out of his pocket. It was a sleek black leather book with the Sterling family crest embossed in gold on the corner. He clicked a heavy fountain pen, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the empty hall. "My mother wants to help you with the transition," he said, writing quickly. "She knows you are struggling. She wants to offer you $50,000. Consider it a divorce settlement, a clean break. You take Zoe, you take the baby if it survives, and you go. You never contact us again." I watched the pen move. $50,000. That was the price tag they put on my daughter's life. That was the cost of erasing us. But then Garrett said something that made my forensic auditor brain snap to attention. He lowered his voice, leaning in closer, his eyes darting toward the trauma doors. "You have to understand, Winston," he whispered, desperation leaking into his tone. "We cannot have a scandal right now. The fiscal year is ending. If that baby is born and brought into the family, the lawyers said the Heritage Trust freezes for an audit. It locks everything down until the lineage is verified. We cannot afford a freeze, not now. The liquidity just isn't there." There it was, the golden nugget buried in the mud. The motive, it wasn't just racism, it was money. It was always money. The Sterling Empire was built on a foundation of sand, and my grandson was the wave that would wash it all away. They weren't just trying to get rid of a black daughter-in-law. They were trying to stop a financial audit that would expose their bankruptcy. I felt a cold smile spreading in my chest, though my face remained a mask of pathetic greed. I needed him to say more. I needed him to incriminate himself. I slowly reached into my pocket, my fingers brushing the record button on my phone. $50,000, I asked, my voice trembling with feigned avarice. I looked at the checkbook with hungry eyes. "That is a lot of money, Mr. Garrett, a lot of money for a man like me." "It is," Garrett said, relieved that I was biting the hook. "It is more than you made in 5 years, Winston. Take it, take her, and go." I stood up slowly, groaning as my stiff joints popped. I took a step closer to him, invading his personal bubble. I let him smell the mud and the sweat on me. "But she is hurt bad, Mr. Garrett," I whined, scratching my chin. "The medical bills will be high. And a baby costs money. 50,000. It will be gone in a month." Garrett looked annoyed. He looked at his watch. He tapped the pen against the checkbook. "Fine," he snapped. "What do you want?" "I want security," I said, making my voice drop lower. "I want to know that if I take my damaged daughter away, I won't starve. 50,000 is an insult for a cripple. Don't you think I saw the disgust in his eyes?" He hated me. He thought I was selling my own child's misery. Good. Let him hate me. Hate makes people sloppy. 75, he countered. I shook my head. 100,000, I said firmly. $100,000 and you never see us again. I will sign whatever you want. I will tell the police she was crazy. I will tell them she jumped. Garrett didn't hesitate. That was his mistake. A man spending his own hard-earned money would have negotiated. A man spending a trust fund that didn't exist anymore just wanted the problem to vanish. Fine, he hissed. 100,000, but you sign the NDA tonight, and you take her out of this hospital the second she is discharged. He bent down to write the check, his hand moving furiously. I stood there watching him sign his name to a felony. Bribery, witness tampering, obstruction of justice. The list of charges was growing by the second, and it was all being recorded on the device in my pocket. "Deal," I whispered. He ripped the check out of the book. The sound of the paper tearing was sharp and satisfying. He held it out to me, a smirk playing on his weak lips. He thought he had won. He thought he was the master of the universe, throwing crumbs to the peasants. Just as my fingers touched the edge of the cool paper, the air in the hallway changed. It dropped 10 degrees. The rhythmic clicking of high heels approached from the elevator bank. Fast. Angry. Garrett froze. The color drained from his face so fast he looked like a corpse. He tried to pull the check back, but I held onto the corner. "What do you think you are doing?" The voice cut through the air like a whip. Constance Sterling stood at the end of the hallway. She had refreshed her makeup. She looked impeccable and terrifying. She marched toward us, her eyes locked on the piece of paper connecting my hand to her son's. "Mother, I handled it," Garrett stammered, his voice jumping an octave. "I made a deal. He is going to take her away. It only cost—" Constance didn't let him finish. She didn't slow down. She closed the distance between them in 3 strides. She didn't look at me. She looked only at her son. She raised her hand, palm open, and swung with the full force of her rage. The slap echoed through the empty corridor. It was a wet, violent sound. Garrett's head snapped to the side. The check tore in half, fluttering to the floor between us. He stumbled back, clutching his cheek, looking at his mother with pure terror. "You idiot!" Constance hissed. Her voice was a low growl, dangerous and vibrating with venom. "You stupid, spineless idiot! Do you think you can buy a leech off with a check? Do you think you can leave a paper trail?" "Mother, please," Garrett whimpered. "The trust, the audit—" "Shut up!" she screamed, losing her composure for the first time. She turned to me then. Her eyes were not human. They were shark eyes, dead and black. She kicked the torn piece of the check away with the toe of her expensive pump. "There is no deal, Winston," she spat. "There is no money. There is no settlement. You get nothing." I stepped back, feigning fear, clutching the torn half of the check that remained in my hand. But we had an agreement," I stuttered. "You have nothing." She advanced on me, pointing a manicured finger at my chest. "You are going to take your broken daughter, and you are going to leave, because if you don't, I will bury you under so many legal fees you will be digging your way out for the next 3 lifetimes. I will ruin your credit. I will have your brother's little trucking business audited by the IRS. I will make you wish you had died in that ravine with her." She was breathing hard, her chest heaving. She was terrifying, yes, but she was also revealing her hand. She threatened my brother. She knew about Luther. That meant she had investigated us. That meant she was scared. "I will take the baby," Constance said, her voice dropping to a whisper that was even scarier than her scream. "If it survives, that child is property of the Sterling estate. You and Zoe are just incubators, and once that child is born, I will make sure you never see it again. Now get out of my sight." She turned back to Garrett, grabbing him by the lapel of his blazer and dragging him away like a misbehaving dog. "Get to the car," she ordered him. "We are calling the lawyers. We are going to destroy them." I watched them walk away. Garrett was sobbing quietly. Constance was typing furiously on her phone. I stood alone in the hallway. I looked down at the torn piece of the check in my hand. It was worthless as currency, but as evidence it was priceless. I reached into my pocket and stopped the recording. 5 minutes and 12 seconds. I had Garrett admitting to the trust fund motive. I had him offering a bribe. I had Constance threatening a federal audit and admitting she wanted to steal the baby. I didn't feel like a poor old man anymore. I felt like a hunter who had just set the perfect snare. I took out my phone and sent the audio file to Luther. Then I texted him 2 words. Motive confirmed. I walked back to the plastic chair and sat down. My clothes were still wet. My stomach was empty. But I wasn't tired. I was energized. Constance Sterling had just declared war. She thought she was Napoleon invading Russia. She didn't realize she had just marched her army into the winter, and I was the cold that was going to freeze them all to death. The doors to the trauma unit opened. Marcus stepped out. He looked exhausted. He pulled off his surgical mask. I stood up, my heart hammering against my ribs. The game with the Sterlings was paused. Now I had to face the only battle that truly mattered. Winston, Marcus said softly, "She is awake." I didn't wait for him to finish. I walked past him into the room where my daughter lay. The war could wait 5 minutes. I needed to see if my reason for fighting was still breathing. I walked out of the clinic into the night air, which was thick with the smell of wet asphalt and impending violence. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, but the cold was still biting. I pulled my collar up not to protect myself from the wind, but to hide my face. I walked past my battered Buick and headed toward the far corner of the parking lot where the darkness was absolute. A black delivery truck with no markings sat idling in the shadows. To anyone walking by, it looked like a maintenance vehicle waiting for a morning shift. To me, it looked like headquarters. I knocked twice on the rear door. A metallic click echoed, and the door swung open. I stepped up into the cab, and the world shifted instantly. The clinic was a place of white walls and sterility. This truck was a cave of technology and retribution. The walls were lined with monitors glowing with blue and green data streams. The air hummed with the sound of cooling fans and the smell of strong black coffee. Luther sat in the captain's chair. My brother is 2 years younger than me, but he looks like he was carved out of granite that has weathered 1,000 storms. He wore a simple black t-shirt that strained against his chest, and he was typing on a keyboard with a speed that belied his massive hands. He didn't look up when I entered. He just slid a steaming paper cup of coffee toward me across the metal desk. "You look like hell," Winston Luther rumbled. His voice was deep enough to vibrate the floorboards. "I feel like it," I replied, taking the coffee. The caffeine hit my system like a jump starter. "Did you get it?" Luther spun his chair around. He pointed to the main screen on the wall. It was filled with spreadsheets, bank statements, and tax filings. "I got everything," Luther said. "I had my guys mirror their hard drives while they were busy at the gala last month. It took 10 minutes to crack their firewall. For a family that cares so much about security, they sure use simple passwords." I stepped closer to the screen. This was my domain. For 30 years, I didn't carry a gun or a badge. I carried a calculator and a red pen. I was a forensic auditor. I hunted down embezzlement, money laundering, and corporate fraud for some of the biggest firms in New York. People think numbers are boring. They are wrong. Numbers are the only thing in the world that cannot lie. People lie. Lawyers lie. Even DNA can be contaminated. But a bank transfer is a footprint in wet cement. It never goes away. I scanned the documents. Most people see columns of figures. I see a narrative. I see a story of greed and desperation. I started reading the Sterling family financials, and within 30 seconds, the image of the wealthy, powerful dynasty began to crumble. "Zoom in on the charitable foundation," I ordered. Luther tapped a key. The screen shifted. The Sterling Heritage Foundation. The pride and joy of Constance Sterling, it was supposed to be a multi-million-dollar endowment helping orphans and sick children. I traced the lines of revenue and expenditure with my finger. "Look at this," I whispered, the thrill of the hunt replacing my fatigue. "Look at the administrative costs. 80% of the donations go to operational expenses, consultant fees, travel, entertainment." "She is using the charity as a piggy bank," Luther said, reading my mind. "It is worse than that," I said. "It is a Ponzi scheme. She is using new donations to pay off the interest on loans she took out against the foundation's assets. Look at the dates. Every time a loan payment is due, she throws a gala. She raises just enough to keep the wolves at the door." I moved to their personal accounts. It was a bloodbath. The mansion was mortgaged 3 times. The cars were leased in the company name. The credit cards were maxed out and rolling over balance transfers every month. "They are broke," I said, leaning back. "They are completely and utterly destitute. Constance Sterling has a negative net worth of $4 million. She is not protecting a legacy. She is protecting a corpse." "So why the baby?" Luther asked. "Why is she so desperate to control Zoe and the child? If she is broke, she can't afford another mouth to feed." I pointed to a document buried deep in the trust file. It was a scan of an old yellowing parchment, the original deed of trust from Garrett's grandfather. "Read Clause 4, A," I said. Luther squinted at the screen. "Upon the birth of the first legitimate male heir of the Sterling line, the secondary trust fund currently held in escrow by the state shall be released to the legal guardian of said heir to ensure the continuity of the estate." I did the math in my head. The secondary trust, it had been sitting there accumulating compound interest for 40 years. "How much is in there?" Luther asked. $12 million, I said. Silence filled the truck. The pieces of the puzzle slammed into place with the force of a sledgehammer. She doesn't hate the baby, I said, my voice cold. She needs the baby. The baby is the key to a $12 million vault. But there is a catch. I pointed to the phrase legal guardian. If Zoe is alive and capable, she is the guardian. She controls the money. Constance gets nothing. But if Zoe is incapacitated, or if Zoe is deemed unfit, or if Zoe signs away her rights because she is a scared single mother who just took a settlement check, then Constance becomes the guardian. Luther finished. And she gets the 12 million. Exactly. She tried to kill Zoe to get the baby. When that failed, she tried to buy her off. Now she is going to try to destroy her credibility, so the court hands the child over. This isn't just racism, Luther. It is a heist. A $12 million bank robbery with an unborn child as the hostage. Luther cracked his knuckles. The sound was like pistol shots. So we expose her, he said. We leak this to the press. Not yet, I said. If we leak it now, she will claim it is a clerical error. She has lawyers who can spin this. We need to catch her hand in the cookie jar. We need her to make a move that proves she is after the money, not the child's well-being. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Marcus. I picked up immediately. Winston here. Winston, we have a situation. Marcus's voice was tight. He sounded angry. Is she okay? Did she crash? She is stable, Marcus said. But administration just called me. Her insurance has been flagged. Flagged? I asked, gripping the phone. Terminated, Marcus corrected. Retroactively. The policyholder. Constance Sterling called the provider an hour ago. She claimed that Zoe was removed from the policy last week due to a change in marital status. She lied, obviously. But the system is automated. The coverage is gone, Winston. I closed my eyes. It was a tactical nuke. Constance knew that a private trauma clinic cost thousands of dollars a day. She knew I didn't have that kind of money. And there is more, Marcus continued. Because she is uninsured and in critical condition, the hospital protocol says we have to transfer her to a state facility. But Constance has already filed a motion. Since she is the next of kin with a private medical setup at her home, she is demanding Zoe be discharged to her care. She has an ambulance on the way, Winston. They are coming to take her. I looked at the screen. I looked at the red numbers that represented Constance's greed. She was moving fast. She was cutting off our supply lines. She wanted Zoe back in the mansion, back under her roof, where she could control the medication, control the narrative, and ensure that the baby was born into her custody. Stall them, I said. I can't, Marcus replied. She has a court order signed by a judge. They will be here in 20 minutes. If I stop them, I lose my license and they take her anyway. Winston, if she goes back to that house, she isn't coming out. I lowered the phone. I looked at Luther. He had heard everything. He was already reaching for the door handle, his face set in a mask of violence. We take her, Luther said. We go in there and we take her out the back. We hide her. No, I said. Luther stopped. He looked at me like I was crazy. Winston. She tried to kill her. You can't let them take her back to the scene of the crime. If we run, we are kidnappers. I said, my mind racing through the options. Constance has the law on her side. If we take Zoe, the police will hunt us down. We will be fugitives. We can't fight a custody battle from a jail cell. Then what do we do? Luther demanded. We let them take her, I said. The words tasted like ash in my mouth. Are you insane? Luther shouted. I walked over to the screen. I pointed to the layout of the Sterling mansion that Luther had pulled up. We let them take her. I repeated, my voice steady. But she won't be alone. You said you have eyes on the house. I have audio and video in the living room and the nursery, Luther said. But not the guest rooms. Get them, I ordered. I want eyes in every corner of that house. I want to know when she sleeps, when she eats, and who enters her room. And I need a man on the inside. A man, Luther asked. The delivery driver, I said. The gardener. The pool boy. I don't care. Find someone who works there who hates her. Everyone who works for Constance Sterling hates her. Find me an ally. Luther stared at me for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. I know a guy, Luther said. The night nurse. He is a cousin of a friend. He owes me a favor. Good, I said. Activate him. I looked back at the phone. Marcus was still on the line. Marcus, I said. Let them take her. Winston. Do it, I interrupted. But before they get there, I need you to do something for me. I need you to give Zoe a phone. A burner, small enough to hide, and tell her one thing, what Marcus asked. Tell her the cavalry is coming. Tell her to play dead. Tell her to be the weak, broken girl they want her to be. Constance is bringing her home to steal the baby. We are going to let her. And when she reaches for that prize, we are going to close the trap on her fingers. I hung up the phone. I felt a cold sweat running down my back. I was gambling with my daughter's life. I was sending her back into the lion's den, but it was the only way. We had to let Constance feel safe. We had to let her believe she had won. Because when people feel safe, they get careless. And when they get careless, the auditor catches them. I turned to Luther. Get the truck moving, I said. We are setting up a command post. If she is going to that house, then we are going to be the ghosts in the walls. I looked at the digital display of the Sterling's debt one last time. Enjoy your $12 million, Constance, I whispered. It is going to be the most expensive money you ever earned. The courtroom did not smell of justice. It smelled of old wood floor polish and the stale cologne of men who decide the fate of others without ever losing a wink of sleep. It was an emergency hearing convened in the private chambers of Judge Pendergast. To an outsider, this might have looked like efficiency. To me, it looked like a slaughter. There was no jury, there was no audience, there was only the judge who I knew played golf with Constance Sterling every Sunday morning. There was Constance's legal team, 3 men in suits that cost more than my entire education. And then there was me. I sat alone at the defendant's table. I had no lawyer, I had no briefcase. I had only the damp clothes on my back and the look of a man who had been crushed by the weight of the world. Judge Pendergast did not even look at me when he entered. He adjusted his robe and shuffled the papers on his desk with an air of boredom. He treated this hearing not as a legal proceeding, but as a favor he was doing for a friend before lunch. Mr. Graves, the judge, said, his voice flat and dismissive. We are here to determine the temporary guardianship of Zoe Graves. Given her incapacitation and the urgent medical decisions required, the court is inclined to expedite this ruling. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't ask about Zoe's condition. He just signaled for the shark in the gray suit to begin. Constance's lead attorney stood up. He didn't speak to me. He spoke to the judge, his voice smooth and practiced. Your Honor. The attorney began gesturing toward Constance, who sat dabbing her dry eyes with a handkerchief. The Sterling family is devastated by this tragedy. But we must be practical. Mrs. Sterling has a fully equipped medical suite in her home staffed by private nurses. She has the financial means to provide the round-the-clock care that Zoe requires. Mr. Graves, on the other hand, he turned to look at me, then a small, pitying smile on his lips. Mr. Graves is retired. He lives in a rented apartment in a neighborhood that frankly is not suitable for a high-risk recovery. He has no medical training, he has no support system. Leaving Zoe in his care would be negligence. Leaving her in a state facility as the hospital protocol demands would be cruel when the Sterlings are offering a sanctuary. It was a beautiful argument. It was logical. It was compassionate. It was a lie wrapped in silk. I stood up slowly. My knees cracked. I let my hands tremble on the table. Your Honor, I said, making my voice sound thin and weak. She is my daughter. She told me she was afraid of that house. She told me she wanted to come home. Judge Pendergast sighed. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Mr. Graves, he said, his tone patronizing, we must focus on facts, not the confused ramblings of a trauma patient. Can you pay for a private trauma team? Can you afford the $50,000 a month required for her rehabilitation? No, sir, I whispered, looking down at my boots. Then the court must act in the best interest of the patient, the judge said, picking up his gavel. Wait, the attorney interrupted. There is one more thing, Your Honor. Something painful that Mrs. Sterling felt obligated to share for the safety of the unborn child. I looked up, genuinely curious about what poison they were about to spill. Constance looked away, burying her face in her hands as if she couldn't bear the shame of it. The lawyer picked up a file. It wasn't a financial document. It was a sworn affidavit. We have reason to believe that Mr. Graves is not just financially ill-equipped, but temperamentally unfit. We have testimony here from neighbors and former teachers indicating a history of severe disciplinary issues. My blood ran cold. I knew what they were doing. They were taking my strict parenting the way I made Zoe study instead of going to parties the way I taught her to be disciplined in a world that would judge her by her skin color, and they were twisting it. Mr. Graves was known to be controlling. The lawyer continued reading from the paper. He isolated his daughter. He was prone to outbursts. Mrs. Sterling is terrified that Zoe's recent mental decline, her depression, her suicidal tendencies are all results of long-term psychological pressure from her father. Returning her to him wouldn't just be irresponsible. It would be dangerous. The room went silent. It was the silence of a tomb. They had done it. They hadn't just called me poor. They had called me an abuser. They had taken the love I poured into my daughter and painted it as the reason she was in a coma. I looked at Constance. She was peeking through her fingers, watching to see if the knife had gone in deep enough. It was a masterstroke. If I screamed, if I shouted that they were liars, I would prove them right. I would be the angry, violent black man they were describing. If I stayed silent, I was accepting the guilt. I gripped the edge of the table so hard my knuckles turned white. I thought about the nights I stayed up helping Zoe with her math homework. I thought about the extra shifts I worked to pay for her architecture degree. I thought about the pride in her eyes when she graduated. And now this woman, this monster who saw my daughter as nothing more than a broodmare, was stealing those memories and turning them into weapons. "Mr. Graves," the judge asked, "do you have a response?" I opened my mouth. I wanted to roar. I wanted to flip the table and tell them about the audit. I wanted to play the recording of Garrett offering me a bribe. But I couldn't. Not yet. If I played my hand now, I might win custody, but Constance would walk free. She would still have her money. She would still have her power. And she would come for us again. To kill the beast, I had to let it swallow me whole. "No, Your Honor," I whispered, letting a tear slide down my cheek. I just want what is best for my girl." "Then it is decided," the judge said, bringing the gavel down with a sound that felt like a bone breaking. "Temporary guardianship is awarded to Garrett and Constance Sterling, effective immediately. The patient is to be transferred to the Sterling estate forthwith. This court is adjourned." The finality of it was suffocating. The bailiff, a large man with a stone face, moved toward me. He didn't grab me, but his presence was a clear order to leave. "Mr. Graves, you need to clear the courtroom," the bailiff grunted. I turned to look at Constance one last time. She had stopped crying. She was standing up, smoothing her skirt. She looked at me, and for a brief second she dropped the mask. She smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a general surveying a conquered city. She mouthed 2 words to me: "Checkmate." She thought she had broken me. She thought she had stripped me of my rights, my reputation, and my child. She turned and walked out the side door with her lawyers laughing softly as they discussed lunch plans. I let the bailiff guide me out of the heavy oak doors. I walked into the hallway, which was bright and loud and indifferent to my tragedy. I walked past the vending machines. I walked past people waiting for traffic court. I walked until I was outside, standing on the concrete steps of the courthouse. The rain had stopped, but the sky was still gray. I took a deep breath of the cool air. I felt lighter. Not because I was happy, but because the burden of pretense was gone. I didn't have to pretend to fight anymore. The legal battle was lost. The real war could finally begin. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. My hand was steady. My eyes were dry. I opened the encrypted messaging app I used to communicate with Luther. I typed a message that I knew would break my own heart, but would seal Constance's fate. Verdict: guilty. They have her. Activate Plan B. Let them take the package to the safe house. I pressed send. The package was my daughter. The safe house was the Sterling mansion. It sounded insane. It sounded like surrender. But I knew something Constance didn't. She wasn't bringing a victim into her home. She was bringing in a Trojan horse. And I was the one holding the remote control. I walked down the steps, my footsteps heavy and deliberate. I wasn't going home to mourn. I was going to the truck. I was going to put on a headset, and I was going to watch every move that woman made until she slipped. The dark night of the soul had arrived. But they forgot one thing about the dark. It is where the monsters hunt. And I was the biggest monster they had ever created. The screen flickered to life in cool, high-definition black and white. From the back of the surveillance truck parked 2 blocks away, I watched my daughter being wheeled into the Sterling mansion. It did not look like a homecoming. It looked like a prisoner transfer. The rain had stopped, but the driveway was still slick and dark. I saw the ambulance doors open. I saw two private paramedics lift the stretcher. Zoe looked so small on that gurney wrapped in white sheets that glowed like a ghost on the thermal imaging monitor. Luther sat next to me, his massive fingers flying across the keyboard, adjusting the focus and switching between the hidden cameras we had planted weeks ago. We had eyes in the hallway. We had eyes in the living room. But most importantly, we had eyes in the guest suite that Constance had converted into a makeshift hospital room. The feed from the teddy bear on the dresser was crystal clear. It showed a room that was more laboratory than sanctuary. There were no flowers. There were no pictures on the walls. Just medical equipment, a hospital bed, and a locking mechanism on the door that was designed to keep people in, not out. I watched them transfer Zoe from the gurney to the bed. She was still groggy from the sedation at the clinic. She didn't fight. She didn't wake up. She just let them handle her like a rag doll. Constance stood in the corner of the room, her arms crossed, watching the paramedics with a critical eye. She wasn't looking at Zoe's face. She was looking at the IV drip. She was looking at the monitors. She was checking the equipment that would keep the incubator alive while she plotted to terminate the pregnancy. "Get out," Constance ordered the paramedics. The audio from the hidden microphone was crisp. Her voice was sharp enough to cut glass. The paramedics left. The door clicked shut. I heard the distinct sound of a deadbolt sliding home. It was a heavy sound. A final sound. My hands gripped the edge of the metal desk in the truck. I was less than a mile away, but I felt like I was on the moon looking back at Earth. I was completely helpless. My daughter was in a room with a woman who had already tried to kill her once today. "Zoom in on her hands," I whispered to Luther. Luther tapped a key. The camera zoomed in digitally. The image became slightly grainy, but we could see everything. Constance walked over to the bedside table. She picked up the chart the doctor had left. She read it for a moment, then tossed it aside with a sneer. She looked down at Zoe. "You really are a problem, aren't you?" Constance whispered. I felt a surge of bile in my throat. Hearing her speak to my unconscious daughter with such disdain was physically painful. But I couldn't look away. I had to witness every second. Constance walked to the locked cabinet on the far wall. She punched in a code. The door popped open. It was stocked with medications, painkillers, antibiotics, and the prenatal vitamins and progesterone that the clinic doctor had prescribed to stop the contractions. She reached for the progesterone. My heart rate slowed slightly. Maybe she was just going to keep her sedated. Maybe she was waiting. But then her hand stopped. She pulled her hand back. She looked at the door to make sure she was alone. Then she reached deeper into the cabinet to the back shelf. She pulled out a small glass vial with a blue cap. "What is that?" I asked Luther, my voice tight. Luther ran the image through a recognition database. A red box appeared around the vial on the screen. "Pitocin," Luther said. His voice was flat, deadly. High concentration. My blood turned to ice. Pitocin was used to induce labor. If you gave that to a woman who was 6 months pregnant and already suffering from abdominal trauma, it wouldn't result in a birth. It would result in a violent forced miscarriage. It would tear the placenta away from the uterine wall. It would kill the baby in minutes, and it might kill Zoe too. "She is going to induce her," I said, panic rising in my chest like a flood. "She is going to force a miscarriage right now." I watched Constance pull a syringe from a sterile wrapper. She inserted the needle into the blue vial. She drew back the plunger. The clear liquid filled the barrel. It looked like water. It looked harmless. But I knew it was death. She walked back to the bed. She didn't look crazy. She didn't look like a villain in a movie. She looked like a nurse doing her rounds. She was calm. She was efficient. That made it so much worse. She picked up the IV line that was running into Zoe's arm. "She isn't going to inject her directly," Luther noted. "She is putting it in the saline bag. It will drip in slowly. It will look like natural complications." I couldn't watch anymore. I stood up, knocking my chair over. The metal clatter echoed in the truck. "We have to go," I shouted. "Now. Luther, get the gear. We are breaking down that door." I turned toward the back of the truck, grabbing the tire iron we kept for emergencies. My brain had shut down. The auditor was gone. The father was in control. I didn't care about the money. I didn't care about the lawsuit. I was going to storm that mansion, and I was going to beat Constance Sterling until she couldn't stand up. "Winston, wait," Luther said. I didn't stop. I reached for the door handle. "Move, Luther," I snarled. "She is killing them." Luther moved faster than a man his size should be able to move. He grabbed my shoulder and slammed me back against the wall of the truck. It wasn't a gentle shove. It was a pin. He held me there, his face inches from mine. "Listen to me," he shouted. "Look at the screen." I struggled against him. "Let me go." "Look at the screen," Luther roared. I looked. On the monitor, Constance was injecting the liquid into the IV bag. She flicked the tube to mix it. Then she opened the valve. The drip began. 1 drop. 2 drops. "She is doing it," I screamed. "She is killing him." "No, she isn't," Luther said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Look at the clamp, Winston. Look at the line below the bag." I squinted at the grainy black and white image. I followed the plastic tube down from the bag toward Zoe's arm. Halfway down the line, tucked behind the bed railing where Constance couldn't see, it was a small yellow plastic clip. "It is clamped," Luther said. "The line is blocked. Nothing is flowing into Zoe's vein." I stared at the image. He was right. The fluid was dripping from the bag, but it was stopping at the clamp. "Who clamped it?" I asked, my breath coming in ragged gasps. "The night nurse," Luther said, releasing his grip on my shoulder. "My contact." I told him to clamp the line near the mattress before he left the room. He told Constance it was to prevent air bubbles. "She doesn't know how to check a line. She is arrogant. She assumes everything works because she ordered it to work." I slid down the wall of the truck until I hit the floor. I put my head in my hands. The adrenaline crash was making me shake uncontrollably. "It is clamped," I repeated. "It is clamped." "For now," Luther said. He offered me a hand and pulled me back up. "But Winston, you saw what she just did." I nodded slowly, my eyes locked on the screen. Constance was smoothing Zoe's hair now. It was a grotesque display of affection. She was stroking the hair of the woman she had just tried to execute. "Rest now, dear," Constance said to the sleeping girl. "It will all be over by morning. Mother knows best." She turned and walked out of the room. We heard the deadbolt slide shut again. I looked at Luther. The rage was still there, but it had cooled into something solid. Something heavy. "We have it," I said. "We have it." Luther agreed. He pointed to the recording indicator. "We have clear video of her injecting an unauthorized substance into a patient's IV. We have the audio of her intent." "If I had gone in there," I said, realizing how close I had come to ruining everything. "If I had broken down that door, she would have dropped the syringe," Luther finished. "She would have claimed she was giving her vitamins. It would have been your word against hers, and you would be the violent intruder. You would be in jail tonight, and tomorrow she would have finished the job for real." I looked at the screen. Zoe was sleeping. The poison was in the bag hanging right above her head, like the sword of Damocles. But the clamp held. A 10-cent piece of yellow plastic was the only thing standing between my grandson and death. "How long until the nurse goes back in?" I asked. "Shift changes in 2 hours," Luther said. "He will go in, swap the bag for a clean one, and save the tainted bag for us as evidence. He is going to label it and put it in the bio-waste bin that he controls." 2 hours, I whispered. "I have to sit here for 2 hours and watch that bag hang over my daughter's head." "This is the hardest part," Winston, Luther said softly. He sat back down at the console. "This is the part where you have to trust the plan more than your fear." I pulled my chair back up. I sat down. I locked my eyes on the monitor. I watched the rise and fall of Zoe's chest. I watched the stillness of the room. Constance Sterling had just graduated from a bigot to a murderer. She thought she had administered the death blow. She was probably downstairs pouring herself a glass of vintage wine, toasting to her cleverness. She didn't know that the poison never reached the vein. She didn't know that she had just provided the final, undeniable nail for her own coffin. I zoomed the camera in on Constance's face as she had left the room. I took a screenshot. I saved it to a folder named Retribution. "Sleep well, Zoe," I whispered to the screen. "Daddy is watching. And tomorrow we are going to burn their house down." I poured myself another cup of black coffee. The steam rose in the cold air of the truck. My hands stopped shaking. I was ready. The trap was set. The bait was taken. Now we just had to wait for the sun to rise and the gala to begin. The lion's den was dark and terrifying, but they forgot that lions aren't the only things that hunt in the dark. The air inside the executive branch of First Sovereign Bank was conditioned to a crisp 68 degrees, but to me it smelled like blood in the water. I was not wearing my muddy gardening clothes anymore. I was wearing a charcoal suit that fit me like a second skin, a relic from my days investigating Fortune 500 fraud. I walked into the meeting room not as Winston Graves, the grieving father, but as the representative of Omega Holdings, a shell company my brother Luther had established a decade ago for moments exactly like this. Across the mahogany table sat Mr. Henderson, the vice president of distressed assets. He looked tired. Dealing with the Sterling family debt had likely taken years off his life. He pushed a stack of documents toward me with the eagerness of a man getting rid of a radioactive waste barrel. "You understand, Mr. Graves," Henderson said, tapping the file, "that this portfolio is toxic. The Sterling estate is leveraged to the hilt. Their credit rating has been downgraded twice in the last quarter. We have been trying to foreclose for months, but Mrs. Sterling has an uncanny ability to file injunctions and delay proceedings. Buying this debt is a gamble." I picked up the pen. It was a Mont Blanc, heavy, authoritative. "I am not looking for a return on investment. Mr. Henderson," I said, my voice smooth and devoid of emotion, "I am looking for control. Omega Holdings specializes in aggressive restructuring. We believe the Sterling assets have sentimental value." Henderson shrugged. He didn't care about my motives. He just wanted the bad debt off his books before the quarterly review. He pointed to the signature line. "As soon as you sign this," Henderson said, "you become the primary lien holder. You own their mortgage. You own their credit lines. You own the cars in their driveway. Effectively, sir, you own them." I looked at the paper. It was just wood pulp and ink, but it was more powerful than any gun. With one signature, I would wrap a steel chain around Constance Sterling's throat. I signed my name. The scratch of the pen against the paper sounded like a guillotine blade dropping. I stood up and shook Henderson's hand. "Pleasure doing business," I said. "Immediate transfer," Henderson asked. "Immediate," I confirmed. "And Mr. Henderson, trigger the default clauses. All of them. Today." I walked out of the bank and into the bright sunlight. I felt a vibration in my pocket. It was the burner phone connected to the surveillance feed. I put in my earpiece as I walked to my car. The financial strike I had just ordered traveled through the digital banking system at the speed of light. Now I was going to listen to the impact. The audio feed from the Sterling kitchen crackled to life. It was the sound of chaos. "Decline." "What do you mean, declined?" Constance's voice was screeching. It was a sound I had never heard from her before. She was usually so composed, so icy. But now, she sounded like a cornered animal. "I am sorry, Mrs. Sterling," a voice on speakerphone replied. It was a customer service representative, likely from the credit card company I had just bought. "Your account has been frozen by the new lien holder due to a breach of contract regarding your debt-to-income ratio. We cannot authorize the catering payment for the gala." "Do you know who I am?" Constance shouted. "I am Constance Sterling. I have been banking with you for 30 years. Unfreeze it." "Now I cannot do that, ma'am," the voice said, sounding bored. "The account is flagged for immediate liquidation. Have a nice day." The line went dead. I heard the sound of a phone being smashed against a countertop. I smiled. It was a small victory, but it was sweet. But then the tone shifted. Constance wasn't just angry. She was terrified. "Garrett," she screamed. I sat in my car listening as Garrett ran into the kitchen. "What is it, Mother? What happened?" "They cut us off." Constance hissed. Her breathing was ragged. "Everything. The cards, the credit line, the catering company just called and said the check bounced. Do you understand what this means? If we cannot throw the gala, we cannot get the donations. If we don't get the donations, we lose the house. We lose everything." "We have the trust fund," Garrett stammered. "The baby." "We don't have the baby yet," Constance roared. "That stubborn girl is still pregnant. The nurse said the drip is too slow. It isn't working fast enough." My hands gripped the steering wheel. The panic I had manufactured was working, but it was having a dangerous side effect. It was making her accelerate her timeline. "Go upstairs," Constance ordered, her voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "Go upstairs and tell that incompetent nurse to increase the dosage. I want that baby out of her by tonight. I need to present a death certificate to the trust lawyers tomorrow morning. Once the child is declared dead, the emergency clause kicks in and we get the initial payout. We need that cash, Garrett, or we are on the street." "I can't," Mother, Garrett whined. "The nurse said it's dangerous." "Do it," Constance screamed. "Do it or I will write you out of the will and you can go live in a trailer with your father-in-law." I started the car and peeled out of the parking lot. I needed to get back to the truck. Luther needed to know that the timeline had just collapsed. We didn't have days. We had hours. I arrived at the surveillance truck 10 minutes later. Luther was already pacing the small space. "You heard I asked stepping inside?" I heard Luther said grimly. The nurse texted me. "Garrett just came in and tried to touch the IV bag. My guy stopped him, said it was against protocol, but Garrett is getting desperate. He threatened to fire him. We are running out of time, Winston." I sat down at the console and pulled up the documents I had just acquired from the bank. I needed a kill switch. I needed something that would end this right now, something bigger than a frozen credit card. I started scanning the mortgage deeds. The Sterling mansion was a sprawling estate valued at $4 million. But as I looked at the property survey, something caught my eye. A small footnote in the legal description of the land. Subject to ground lease agreement dated October 14, 1890. A ground lease. That meant the Sterlings owned the house, the bricks and the mortar, but they didn't own the land it sat on. They were renting the dirt. "Luther, pull up the county land registry," I said, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Check the expiration on the 1890 lease for the Sterling plot." Luther typed furiously. The database loaded. A map of the county appeared. The Sterling estate was highlighted in red. "Here it is," Luther said. "Original lease term, 99 years. Renewed once for a 25-year extension in 1989. I did the math in my head. 1,890 plus 99 is 1989. Plus 25. 2014, I whispered. That lease expired 10 years ago. No look at the addendum, Luther pointed to the screen. There was a clause for an automatic 10-year grace period if the leaseholder could not be located. That grace period expires. He stopped. He looked at me. His eyes were wide. "It expires today," Luther said. "October 14th. Today at midnight." "And who is the leaseholder?" I asked. "Who owns the land?" Luther opened the historical deed. It was a scanned image of a handwritten document over a century old. The handwriting was elegant looped script. "The Free Men's Land Trust," Luther read. "Beneficiary, the descendants of Samuel Graves." The heir left the truck. Samuel Graves, our great-grandfather, the man who had been a sharecropper on this very land, the man who family legend said had bought a useless patch of swamp from a destitute plantation owner just after the Civil War. That swamp was now the most expensive real estate in Virginia. "They are squatters," I whispered. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. Constance Sterling, the woman who called my blood dirty, has been living on my land for her entire life. Her house, her pool, her precious, perfectly manicured gardens. It all sits on dirt that belongs to us. "And the lease expires tonight," Luther said, a slow, terrifying grin spreading across his face. "Which means at 12:01 a.m., the land reverts to full control of the trust, to us." And under Virginia property law, I said, my mind racing through the statutes I had studied for years, if a ground lease expires and is not renewed, any improvements built on that land become the property of the landowner. "The house," Luther said. "The house," I confirmed. "The furniture, the gates, the medical equipment in the guest room. Tonight at midnight, it all becomes ours." I looked at the clock. It was 4:00 p.m. We had 8 hours to keep Zoe safe. 8 hours until I could walk through those front gates not as an intruder, but as the landlord. "Constance thinks she is fighting for a trust fund," I said, standing up. "She doesn't realize she is fighting an eviction." "Luther, tell the nurse to hold the line. Tell him to barricade the door if he has to. Tell him that if he keeps Zoe safe until midnight, I will give him a bonus that will pay off his mortgage." I looked at the screen where Constance was currently pacing in her living room drinking a glass of scotch, unaware that the floor beneath her feet was already shifting. "You want to play games with inheritance, Constance," I asked the screen. "You want to talk about legacy. Let's talk about Samuel Graves. Let's talk about the man whose back was broken on that soil so you could build a palace." The financial web was complete. I had cut off her money. I had trapped her in debt, and now I held the deed to her destruction. I sat back down and watched the clock. Every tick was a countdown to justice. The storm was coming, and this time the Sterlings had nowhere to hide. The room was too quiet. That was the first thing I noticed when I opened my eyes. There was no hum of city traffic, no beeping of clinic monitors. Just a heavy, suffocating silence that smelled of lavender and antiseptic. I tried to sit up, but my body felt like it was made of lead. My ribs screamed in protest, a sharp reminder of the ravine, the mud, and the fall that should have killed me. I looked around. I wasn't in a hospital. The walls were covered in expensive silk wallpaper. The curtains were drawn tight, blocking out the daylight. I knew this room. It was the guest suite at the Sterling estate, the last place on earth I wanted to be. Panic flared in my chest, hot and immediate. I reached for my stomach. My hand found the curve of my bump. He was still there. I felt a small fluttering kick against my palm. A sob caught in my throat. He was alive. Despite the cold, despite the fall, despite his grandmother's best efforts, my son was still fighting. I scanned the room for an exit. The door was heavy mahogany. I knew without trying that it was locked. Sitting in the corner reading a magazine was a man in blue scrubs I didn't recognize. He wasn't one of the usual Sterling staff. He looked tired, his eyes scanning the room every few seconds. I let out a low moan, not entirely fake. The nurse looked up instantly. He didn't rush over with the fake solicitude I expected. He walked to the bed, quickly checking the door before he spoke. "You are awake," he whispered. His voice was urgent. "Don't move. Don't speak loudly." I stared at him, confusion clouding my brain. "Who are you?" I croaked. "I am a friend of Luther," he said softly. The name cut through the fog like a beacon. Luther. My uncle. That meant my father was involved. That meant I wasn't alone. "Your father is watching." The nurse continued, glancing at the teddy bear on the dresser. "He knows everything. He knows about the IV. I looked at the bag hanging above my head. It looked innocent enough, but now it seemed to pulse with menace. "The line is clamped," the nurse assured me, showing me the yellow clip hidden behind the bed rail. "But you have to pretend. You have to be weak. Constance thinks you are dying. You need to let her believe it." Why, I whispered, tears pricking my eyes. "Why am I here? Because she needs you to sign something," the nurse said. "Or she needs you to expire. I don't know which one she prefers, but she is coming back soon. When she does, I have to leave. I can't stop her, Zoe. But you can." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a tiny burner phone. It was warm from being held close to his body. "Take this," he said, pressing it into my hand under the sheets. "It is on a silent call with your father. When she comes in, just make sure she speaks clearly. Make sure she tells you exactly what she wants." I gripped the phone. It was a lifeline. It was a weapon. I heard the heavy click of the deadbolt sliding back. The nurse's eyes widened. "Hide it," he hissed. "Remember, you are broken." He stepped back, assuming a professional detached posture just as the door swung open. Constance Sterling entered the room. She wasn't wearing her public mask anymore. There were no tears, no worried frowns. She looked impatient. She looked like a CEO dealing with a lingering supply chain issue. She was holding a glass of amber liquid in one hand and a file folder in the other. "Leave us," she ordered the nurse without looking at him. The nurse nodded and slipped out, closing the door behind him. I heard the lock engage again. I was alone with the wolf. I let my head loll to the side, keeping my eyes half closed. I made my breathing shallow and ragged. I felt the mattress dip as she sat down on the edge of the bed. She didn't touch me. She didn't stroke my hair like she did when Garrett was watching. She just stared at me, sipping her drink. "You are tough, I will give you that," Constance said. Her voice was conversational, chillingly casual. Most girls would have had the decency to disappear in that woods. But you had to crawl out. You had to make a scene. I didn't answer. I just groaned softly, clutching my stomach. "Stop acting, Zoe," she snapped. "Or don't. It doesn't matter. The end result is the same." She opened the folder and pulled out a document. She waved it in front of my face. "This is a waiver," she said. "It grants full custody of any potential offspring to the Sterling estate in the event of your mental incapacitation. Since you just tried to kill yourself, the courts will view you as unfit. If you sign this, I will call the real doctors. I will transfer you to a hospital where they might actually save that thing inside you." She paused, taking a long sip of her drink. "If you don't sign it well, nature will take its course. The medication you are on is quite potent." I looked at her then. I opened my eyes fully. I wanted her to see me. I wanted her to see the mother she was threatening. "You put something in the IV," I rasped. Constance laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "I am helping you, Zoe. You don't want this baby. A mixed-race child in this town, with a father who is a spineless idiot and a mother who is a charity case. It is a kindness, really. I am scrubbing the stain out of the family fabric. I felt the phone vibrating in my hand. My father was listening. Every word she said was being recorded. I needed more. I needed her to admit it wasn't about race. I needed the money motive. It is not about the stain, I whispered, forcing myself to sound defeated. It is about the trust fund. Garrett told me. Constance's eyes narrowed. The mention of the money stripped away her last layer of pretense. She slammed the glass down on the bedside table. Garrett talks too much, she hissed. But yes, since you are so smart, let's be clear. That trust fund is $12 million. It requires a living heir, but it doesn't require a living mother. She leaned in close, her breath smelling of expensive scotch and rot. You are just a vessel, Zoe, a broken, disposable vessel. I need the key to the vault. Once that baby is born, you are irrelevant. But frankly, I would prefer if the baby didn't survive either. Then I could claim the emergency payout for tragic loss of lineage and I wouldn't have to look at a grandchild that reminds me of your father. She stood up, smoothing her skirt. So here's your choice. Sign the paper and disappear, or lie there and wait for the Pitocin to rip you apart. Either way, I win. I always win. She tossed the pen onto the bed. It rolled against my leg. I will be downstairs, she said. When you are ready to stop being a martyr and start being a realist, knock on the door. She turned and walked out. The lock clicked. I lay there in the silence. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would burst. She had admitted it. She had admitted the poisoning. She had admitted the fraud. She had admitted that she viewed my death as an acceptable business expense. I pulled the phone out from under the sheets. The screen was still glowing. The call timer was at 4 minutes and 20 seconds. Daddy, I whispered, my voice trembling. The voice that came back was not the voice of the gentle father who raised me. It was a voice of cold, hard steel. I got her baby. I have every word. I started to cry then. Not from fear, but from relief. She wants to kill him, Daddy. She wants to kill my baby. She can't touch you, my father said. Look at the clock, Zoe. I looked at the digital clock on the bedside table. It was 8:00 p.m. 4 more hours, my father said. Just hold on for 4 more hours. At midnight, the lease expires. At midnight, I am not just your father anymore. I am the owner of that house, and I am coming to evict the trash. I wiped my tears. I looked at the IV bag. I reached up and checked the clamp myself. It was tight. I am okay, I said, finding a strength I didn't know I had. I am not signing anything. Good girl, my father said. Rest now. When the clock strikes 12, the world changes. I hung up the phone and hid it back under the mattress. I looked at the pen Constance had left. I picked it up and snapped it in half. She thought she was waiting for me to break. She was wrong. I was just waiting for the lease to run out. The sun began to set over the Virginia hills, casting long, blood-red shadows across the manicured lawns of the Sterling estate. To the casual observer, the mansion looked like a fortress of unshakable power. The white pillars gleamed. The marquee tent on the south lawn rippled gently in the evening breeze. Valets in crisp white uniforms were already lining up, waiting for the parade of limousines that would soon arrive. Inside the master suite, Constance Sterling stood before a floor-to-ceiling mirror. She was preparing for what she believed would be her greatest victory. She wore a gown of midnight blue velvet that hugged her frame and cost more than most people earned in a year. Around her neck hung the sterling sapphire, a heavy, glittering stone that felt cold against her skin. She did not look like a woman on the brink of bankruptcy. She did not look like a woman whose credit cards had been declined that morning. She looked like royalty. She picked up a glass of vintage champagne and took a slow sip. The bubbles tasted like success. In her mind, the equation was already balanced. The gala would raise enough cash to pay the immediate debts. By tomorrow morning, the girl upstairs would have signed the waiver or succumbed to the medication. The baby would be secured. The trust fund would be unlocked. The $12 million would flow into her accounts, washing away the red ink like the tide washing away footprints in the sand. She turned to her reflection and smiled. It was a practice smile, the one she used for donors and senators. You are a survivor, Constance, she whispered to herself. You did what had to be done. She walked to the window and looked down at the driveway. She saw Garrett pacing nervously by the fountain. He looked weak. He looked terrified. She felt a flash of irritation. He was the only loose thread in her tapestry. She would have to manage him tonight. She would have to make sure he didn't drink too much and start blubbering to a donor about his conscience. She checked her phone. No messages from the bank. No messages from the police. The silence was golden. It meant the old man Winston had given up. It meant he was probably sitting in some dingy apartment crying over his defeat in court. He had learned his lesson. You do not go to war with the Sterlings. You simply cannot win against pedigree. She finished her champagne and set the glass down on the antique vanity. She didn't know that the vanity, the glass, and the floor she stood on were about to belong to someone else. She checked her makeup one last time. Flawless. She sprayed a mist of perfume into the air and walked through it. She was ready to go downstairs and play the role of the benevolent matriarch. She was ready to accept the checks and the adulation. She was ready for her coronation. She didn't know she was dressing for her execution. 40 miles away in the penthouse suite of the city's most exclusive hotel, the atmosphere was very different. There was no champagne, there was no music, there was only the quiet, focused energy of a surgical team preparing for an operation. I stood in front of the mirror, but I did not see the old man in the muddy gardening clothes anymore. That man was gone. In his place stood Winston Graves, the forensic auditor, the man who had taken down Ponzi schemes and dismantled corrupt hedge funds. I was shaving my face with a straight razor. The blade scraped against my skin, removing the gray stubble, revealing the sharp, uncompromising jawline beneath. Luther walked into the room. He was holding 2 garment bags. He laid them on the bed with reverence. "It is time to suit up," Brother Luther said. I opened the bag. Inside was a black bespoke suit from Savile Row. I hadn't worn it in 10 years. It was the suit I wore when I testified before Congress. It was the suit I wore when I sent the CEO of Enron's subsidiary to federal prison. I put on the white shirt. The cotton was crisp and cool. I fastened the cufflinks. They were gold-shaped like scales of justice. I pulled on the trousers. I tightened the silk tie. Every layer was a piece of armor. Every button was a lock on my emotions. I sat on the edge of the bed and pulled on my shoes. They were polished to a mirror shine. I stood up and buttoned the jacket. It fit perfectly. I felt the change happen in my posture. My back straightened, my shoulders went back. The arthritis pain seemed to vanish, replaced by a cold, hard purpose. Luther stood next to me. He was wearing a dark navy suit that made him look like a mountain range in formal wear. He looked dangerous. He looked like the kind of security you couldn't hire, only earn. I walked to the safe in the corner of the room. I punched in the code. Inside, resting on a velvet pillow, was my watch, a Patek Philippe Grandmaster chime. It was a retirement gift from a client whose company I had saved. It was worth more than the Sterling mansion. I hadn't worn it since Zoe's mother died. I clasped it around my wrist. The weight of the platinum was grounding. I looked at the face. "The time is 8:45 p.m., I said. "The lease expires in 3 hours and 15 minutes, Luther replied. I checked my pocket. I had the documents. I had the original 1890 deed. I had the transfer of debt from the bank. And I had the burner phone with the recordings of Constance's confession. "Let's go," I said. We took the private elevator down to the garage. We didn't take the Buick. The Buick was for the poor old father. Tonight we were the landlords. Waiting for us in the reserved bay was a Maybach S-Class, black on black, looking like a shark on wheels. The driver, one of Luther's most trusted men, held the door open. I slid into the back seat. The smell of rich leather filled the cabin. Luther sat beside me. He opened a laptop and connected it to the car's secure Wi-Fi. "I have eyes on the gala," Luther said. "Guests are arriving. The mayor is there. The chief of police is there." "Good," I said. "I want them all there. I want witnesses." The car glided out of the garage and onto the highway. The engine purred with a low, menacing growl. We were moving toward the Sterling estate, not as guests, but as a force of nature. I watched the city lights blur past the tinted windows. I felt a strange calm settle over me. This was the eye of the storm. The panic was gone. The fear was gone. There was only the plan. I pulled out my encrypted phone. I had one last call to make. I didn't dial 911. I didn't dial the local precinct. I dialed a number that went directly to a desk in Quantico. Special Agent Miller, a gruff voice, answered on the second ring. "Hello, David," I said. "It is Winston." "Winston, I haven't heard your voice in 5 years. Are you coming out of retirement?" I am, I said. I have a case for you. Wire fraud, bank fraud, attempted murder, and grand larceny involving a charitable trust. That sounds like a heavy load, Miller said. Who is the target? The Sterling Heritage Foundation. I said. There was a pause on the line. I heard the sound of typing. The Sterlings, Miller asked. They are untouchable in that county, Winston. Not anymore, I said. I have the evidence. I have the recordings. I have the financial trail. And David, I have a hostage situation. Hostage, Miller's voice sharpened. My daughter, I said, and my unborn grandson. Tell me where you are, Miller said. I am en route to the Sterling estate, I said. I am going to breach the perimeter at 9:30. I need you there, David. I don't trust the local police. The chief is drinking their champagne right now. I am mobilizing a team, Miller said. We are 40 minutes out. Winston, do not engage until we get there. I can't promise that, I said. The clock is ticking. Just get there, David, and bring the cuffs. I hung up the phone. The die was cast. The FBI was in motion. The trap was set. I looked at Luther. He nodded. He knew what was coming. I closed my eyes and pictured Zoe in that room. I pictured the IV bag. I pictured Constance's smug smile. Hold on, baby, I whispered. Daddy is coming, and I am bringing the thunder. The Maybach turned off the highway and onto the winding road that led to the estate. Up ahead, I could see the glow of the gala lights against the night sky. It looked like a party. To me, it looked like a crime scene waiting to happen. I checked my Patek Philippe one last time, 9:15 p.m. Showtime, I said. The car accelerated, eating up the asphalt. We were the wolves coming to the door, but this time the wolves were wearing silk suits and carrying the law in their pockets. The calm was over. The storm had arrived. The gravel of the long, winding driveway crunched beneath the tires of the Maybach with a sound that was satisfyingly heavy. It was the sound of money. It was the sound of power. Through the tinted windows, I watched the Sterling estate come into view. It was lit up like a cruise ship in the middle of a dark ocean. The white pillars were bathed in floodlights. The fountain in the center of the circular driveway was shooting water high into the air, sparkling like diamonds. It was beautiful. It was majestic. And it was all a lie built on a foundation of theft and deceit. Luther sat beside me, his face a mask of stone. He adjusted his cufflinks, checking the time on his heavy gold watch. It was 9:30. The gala was in full swing. Inside that tent, the wealthiest people in Virginia were drinking champagne that Constance Sterling could not afford, celebrating a legacy that was about to be evicted. The car rolled to a stop at the security checkpoint. A young man in a uniform that looked like it belonged to a dictator's private army stepped forward. He held a clipboard in one hand and a flashlight in the other. He shone the light into the back seat, squinting. He didn't see a gardener. He didn't see a poor old man. He saw two black men in suits that cost more than his car. Confusion flickered in his eyes. He checked his clipboard. Named the guard, asked, his tone polite but firm. Winston Graves, I said. The window slid up. The guard scanned the list. He ran his finger down the names of senators, judges, and CEOs. He frowned. He flipped the page. He checked again. I am sorry, sir, the guard said, straightening up. I don't see a Graves on the guest list. This is a private event, invitation only. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I simply reached into the inside pocket of my jacket and pulled out a folded document. It wasn't an invitation. It was the transfer of deed and the primary lien holder certificate from the bank. I handed it to him through the window. I am not a guest, I said, my voice smooth and cold as the night air. I am Omega Holdings. I am the entity that owns the debt on this property. And unless you want to explain to your boss why you denied entry to the man who signs your paycheck, you will open that gate. The guard looked at the document. He saw the bank's seal. He saw the stamp of the county clerk. He didn't understand all the legal jargon, but he understood the look in my eyes. He understood that he was a small fish swimming in a tank with a shark. He handed the paper back to me, his hand trembling slightly. I didn't know, sir, he stammered. I will radio ahead. Don't, Luther said from the shadows of the car. The word was low, a rumble of thunder. Do not radio. We want it to be a surprise. The guard swallowed hard. He stepped back and waved his hand. The heavy iron gates swung open. The Maybach rolled forward, gliding up the driveway like a phantom. We parked right in front of the main entrance, blocking a red Ferrari. The valet rushed over, looking annoyed, ready to tell us to move. Then Luther stepped out. Luther is 6'4" and built like a linebacker. He buttoned his jacket and stared at the valet. The valet stopped moving. He took the keys from Luther without a word and backed away. I stepped out onto the red carpet. The air smelled of expensive perfume, roasting pork, and old money. I took a deep breath. It was the last breath of fresh air Constance Sterling would ever enjoy. "Ready?" Luther asked. I adjusted my tie. I felt the weight of the Patek Philippe on my wrist. I felt the burner phone in my pocket. "Let's go show them who really owns the plantation," I said. We walked up the wide stone steps. The double doors were open, spilling golden light and classical music out into the night. We walked into the grand ballroom. It was packed. There were crystal chandeliers hanging from the ceiling. There were waiters moving through the crowd with silver trays. There was laughter. There was the clinking of glasses. And then there was silence. It started near the door and spread outward like a ripple in a pond. People turned to look. They saw two black men standing in the entrance, not serving drinks, not playing jazz instruments, standing like kings. The chatter died down. The music seemed to fade. All eyes were on us. I scanned the room. I saw the police chief standing by the bar holding a glass of scotch. I saw the mayor laughing with a donor. And then I saw her. Constance Sterling was on the stage at the far end of the room. She was standing at a podium bathed in a spotlight. She looked magnificent in her blue velvet gown. She looked like the queen of the world. She had been in the middle of a speech thanking everyone for their generosity. She stopped mid-sentence. She squinted against the glare of the spotlight. She saw me. For a moment she looked confused. She didn't recognize me. The last time she saw me, I was a muddy, broken old man in a wet sweater. Now I was a reflection of power. But then recognition dawned. Her eyes widened. Her hand gripped the microphone stand. The shock turned instantly to rage. She leaned into the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice amplified across the silent room, "it seems we have an intruder." The crowd gasped. Heads turned back to me. Whispers started. Security Constance called out, pointing a manicured finger at me. "Please escort the help out. I believe the janitorial staff is supposed to use the service entrance." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Nervous laughter, but laughter nonetheless. She was trying to humiliate me. She was trying to reduce me to a stereotype. She was calling me a janitor in a room full of millionaires. I didn't flinch. I didn't turn around. I started walking. I walked straight down the center aisle. I walked with the slow, deliberate pace of a man who knows he is walking on his own floor. The crowd parted for me. They moved away, not out of respect, but out of confusion. They didn't know what to make of me. I looked straight ahead, my eyes locked on Constance. "Mr. Graves." Constance sneered, her voice dripping with venom. "You are embarrassing yourself. Did you come here to beg for more money? Did you spend the $100 I gave you already? Look at him, everyone. This is what desperation looks like." I kept walking. I was 10 feet away from the stage. "Get out!" she screamed, losing her composure. "You are ruining my gala." I reached the steps of the stage. 2 security guards moved to intercept me. Luther was there instantly. He didn't hit them. He just stepped in their path and crossed his arms. He was a wall of muscle that said, "Do not pass." The guards hesitated. In that second of hesitation, I walked up the stairs. I stood next to Constance on the podium. Up close, I could see the cracks in her foundation. I could see the sweat beading on her upper lip. I could smell the fear radiating off her under the heavy perfume. She looked at me with pure hatred. "What do you think you are doing?" she hissed off mic. "I will have you arrested." I looked at her. I didn't smile. I reached out and took the microphone from her hand. She was so shocked she let it go. I turned to face the crowd. The lights were blinding, but I didn't blink. I looked at the sea of white faces. I looked at the people who had funded this woman's cruelty for decades. "Good evening," I said. My voice was calm, deep, and steady. It echoed through the ballroom, silencing the murmurs. Constance tried to grab the mic back. I blocked her with my shoulder. "My name is Winston Graves," I continued, "and Mrs. Sterling is right. I am not a guest." A security guard started climbing the stairs. "Sit down!" Luther roared from the floor. His voice was so loud it shook the crystals on the chandelier. The guard froze. I looked back at the crowd. "Mrs. Sterling asked if I came here to beg," I said. I looked at Constance. I shook my head slowly. "No, Constance. I don't need your money. I bought your debt this morning." A gasp went through the room. I saw the banker, Mr. Henderson, standing in the back. He nodded slowly. "I didn't come here to eat your food," I said, my voice rising. "And I certainly didn't come here to beg." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the remote control that connected to the AV system Luther had hacked. "I came here to show you a movie," I said. Constance's face went pale. She looked at the remote. She looked at the giant projection screen behind her, which was currently displaying the logo of the Sterling Heritage Foundation. "What are you doing?" she whispered. "Stop it." I looked her in the eye. "It is too late to stop Constance," I said. "The lease is up." I pressed the button. The screen behind us flickered. The logo disappeared. The room went dark for a second. Then a grainy black and white image appeared. It was the view from a hidden camera. It showed a bedroom. It showed a hospital bed. It showed a pregnant woman lying still. And it showed Constance Sterling standing over her holding a vial of poison. The room went dead silent. The only sound was the audio from the speakers, crisp and clear. "You are just a vessel, Zoe, a broken, disposable vessel." The voice on the screen was unmistakable. It was Constance. I stepped back from the podium. I folded my hands. I watched the crowd watch the monster. The payoff had begun, and it was going to be glorious. The image on the giant projection screen was grainy and black and white, but the horror it depicted was crystal clear in high definition. It was a feed from a camera hidden inside a teddy bear, angled perfectly to show the hospital bed in the Sterling guest room. On the screen, my daughter Zoe lay unconscious, her chest rising and falling in a rhythm that was too slow, too drugged. Standing over her was Constance Sterling. The Constance on the screen was not the elegant woman in the blue velvet gown who stood next to me on the stage. The Constance on the screen was a predator in a silk blouse holding a vial of clear liquid. The audio that blasted through the ballroom speakers was so sharp it felt like Constance was whispering directly into the ear of every person in the room. "You are just a vessel, Zoe," the recorded voice hissed. "A broken, disposable vessel. I need the key to the vault. Once that baby is born, you are irrelevant." The ballroom, which had been buzzing with laughter and music just minutes ago, was now dead silent. It was a silence so heavy, it felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. 300 of Virginia's wealthiest citizens stood frozen, their champagne glasses halfway to their mouths, their eyes locked on the screen. On the video, Constance moved closer to the bed. She held up the vial. "It is a kindness, really," the recording continued. "I am scrubbing the stain out of the family fabric, and honestly, I would prefer if the baby didn't survive either. Then I could claim the emergency payout for tragic loss of lineage." I stood on the stage, my hands folded behind my back, watching the audience. I saw the mayor's jaw drop. I saw the police chief lower his drink, his face turning a shade of pale gray. I saw the wives of the board members cover their mouths with their hands. They were watching a woman they had dined with, a woman they had entrusted with their charity money, admit to plotting the murder of her own grandchild for an insurance payout. But the video wasn't done. I had instructed Luther to include the second clip, the one from the kitchen earlier that day. The screen flickered, and the scene changed. It was Constance on the phone screaming at the bank. "Those idiots," the recorded Constance shouted. "Those fools giving money to the foundation. They think they are saving orphans. They are just paying for my lifestyle. If we don't get the donations from the gala tonight, we lose the house. I need those cash cows to open their wallets one last time before the audit hits." A collective gasp ripped through the room. It was the sound of betrayal. These people didn't care about Zoe. They didn't care about a black girl in a guest room. But they cared about their money. They cared about being called fools. Constance had just insulted every single person who held a checkbook in that room. She had called them cash cows. She had admitted that the charity was a sham designed to fund her mansion and her parties. I looked at the real Constance standing next to me. She was trembling. Her face had lost all color. She looked at the screen, then she looked at the crowd. For the first time in her life, she saw her reflection in their eyes, and she didn't see admiration. She saw disgust. "Turn it off," Constance whispered. Her voice was weak, barely audible over the booming audio of her own confession. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just watched her crumble. "Turn it off," she screamed, her voice cracking. "This is fake. This is AI. He made it up. It is a deep fake." She lunged toward the audiovisual technician who was manning the booth at the side of the stage. "Cut the feed," she shrieked at the terrified young man. Cut the power. Do it now or you are fired. The technician looked at his console. He frantically pushed buttons. He tried to lower the volume fader. He tried to hit the kill switch. Nothing happened. Luther had locked the system from the truck outside. The volume actually got louder. I need that baby out of her by tonight, the voice on the screen roared. Do it or I will write you out of the will. Constance grabbed a heavy glass vase of flowers from the podium and hurled it at the screen. It shattered against the canvas water, and lilies exploding everywhere, but the image didn't flicker. The face of the monster remained looming over the ballroom, larger than life. She turned to the crowd, her hands shaking wildly. Don't listen to him, she pleaded, her eyes darting from face to face. He is a criminal. He is a blackmailer. I am Constance Sterling. I am one of you. You know me. But they did know her. That was the problem. They knew her now in a way they never had before. They saw the mask slip, and they saw the rot beneath it. A woman in the front row was Vanderwall, the biggest donor in the county, stepped forward. She was wearing a diamond necklace that caught the light. She looked at Constance with a cold, hard stare. You called us fools, Constance, Mrs. Vanderwall said. Her voice was not loud, but it carried across the silent room. You called us cash cows. Constance reached out a hand toward her. Margaret, please, she begged. I was stressed. I didn't mean it. Mrs. Vanderwall took a glass of red wine from a passing waiter's tray. She didn't drink it. She poured it slowly onto the floor at Constance's feet. The red liquid splashed onto the hem of Constance's blue velvet dress, staining it dark like blood. I think I will be canceling my check, Mrs. Vanderwall said, and I will be calling the district attorney. The spell broke. The room erupted into chaos. It wasn't a riot. It was the social equivalent of a firing squad. People started shouting. Donors were pulling out their phones, canceling transfers. Board members were huddling together, distancing themselves from the toxicity. The police chief turned his back on the stage and started speaking rapidly into his radio. Constance stood alone on the stage, the wine soaking into her dress, the sound of her own voice still condemning her from the speakers. She looked small. She looked old. She looked like a building that had been imploded from the inside. I turned my attention to the floor. To the right of the stage stood Garrett. He was not alone. He was standing with Victoria, the daughter of a steel magnate. She was the woman Constance had chosen to replace Zoe. She was blonde, wealthy, and perfectly pedigreed. She was the backup plan. Garrett looked like a deer caught in the headlights of a semi-truck. He was sweating profusely. He looked at the screen. Then he looked at Victoria, who was staring at him with a mixture of horror and revulsion. Victoria, wait, Garrett stammered, grabbing her arm. It is not what it looks like. That video is edited. You know Mother. She gets dramatic. She didn't mean it. Victoria looked at his hand on her arm as if it were a poisonous spider. She pulled away violently. Dramatic Victoria asked, her voice shrill. She is talking about murdering a baby, Garrett. She is talking about murdering your baby. It is complicated, Garrett whined, reverting to the spineless boy he had always been. The girl, Zoe, she is unstable. We were just trying to protect the estate. We did it for the future. For us. Victoria took a step back. She looked at Garrett, really looked at him perhaps for the first time. She saw the weakness. She saw the cruelty. She saw the man who would let his mother poison his wife just to secure a trust fund. For us, Victoria laughed, a harsh, incredulous sound. Do you think I would marry into this? Do you think I would let my children anywhere near that woman? Or you? Garrett tried to reach for her again. Victoria, please. The scandal will blow over. We have the name. We have the house. You have nothing. Victoria spat. She raised her hand. It was a reflex born of pure disgust. She slapped him. It wasn't a theatrical slap. It was a hard, stinging blow to the side of his face that knocked his head back. The sound of the slap cut through the murmuring crowd. People turned to watch. Garrett stood there, clutching his cheek, his eyes watering. Don't ever contact me again, Victoria said. She turned on her heel and marched toward the exit. The crowd parted for her. She didn't look back. Garrett watched her go. He watched his backup plan, his social standing, and his future wife walk out the door. He looked up at the stage. He looked at his mother. Constance was still screaming at the technician, oblivious to the fact that her son had just lost everything too. I leaned into the microphone one last time. The show is over, I said, but the eviction is just beginning. I stepped down from the podium. The crowd moved away from me, giving me a wide berth. But it wasn't out of confusion anymore. It was out of fear. They realized that the man in the black suit wasn't a victim. He was the judge, the jury, and the executioner, and he had just delivered the verdict. The ballroom was a cauldron of noise and confusion. The echoes of Constance's recorded confession still hung in the air like toxic smoke. But Constance Sterling was not a woman who surrendered easily. She wiped the wine from her dress, smoothed her hair, and pointed a trembling finger toward the main entrance, where flashing blue lights were reflecting off the crystal chandeliers. The doors swung open, and Police Chief Harrison marched in, flanked by 4 uniformed officers. Harrison was a large man with a red face who had enjoyed the Sterling family's hospitality for decades. Constance saw him and let out a sob of relief. She believed the cavalry had arrived to save the damsel. She believed the system she had manipulated for so long was here to protect her one last time. She ran down the steps of the stage, her heels clicking frantically on the marble floor, and threw herself toward the chief. "Thank God you are here, Harrison," she screamed, clutching his uniform sleeve. "Arrest him! Arrest that man on the stage. He hacked our system. He is trespassing. He is slandering me with deep-fake videos. Get him out of my house and throw him in a cell where he belongs." Chief Harrison looked up at me. I was still standing on the podium, looking down at the chaos with the calmness of a statue. He looked at Luther, who was standing at the bottom of the stairs like a sentinel. Then he looked back at Constance. He looked uncomfortable. He looked like a man who knew he was caught between a rock and a hard place. "Constance," he said, his voice low. "We heard the audio from the parking lot. That sounded like a confession to attempted murder." "It is fake," Constance shrieked, her eyes bulging. "It is all fake. Are you going to take the word of a disgruntled grandfather over mine? I am Constance Sterling. I built this town. Now do your job and arrest the trespasser." The chief hesitated. He put his hand on his baton. He took a step toward the stage. "Mr. Graves," the chief called out, "you need to step down. We need to sort this out at the station." I didn't step down. Instead, I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket one last time. I pulled out the document that Luther and I had retrieved from the county archives. It wasn't a digital file. It was an original yellowed piece of parchment protected inside a plastic sleeve. I held it up. The spotlight hit the old paper, illuminating the faded ink. "I am not trespassing, Chief," I said. My voice was amplified by the microphone booming across the room. "In fact, the only trespassers in this room are standing on the floor." "What are you talking about?" Constance spat. "This is my house. My husband built it." "He built the house?" "Yes," I said, walking slowly down the stairs until I was standing face to face with her and the chief. "But he didn't buy the land." I handed the document to the chief. "Read the header. Harrison," I said. The chief squinted at the document. He adjusted his glasses. "Ground lease agreement dated October 14th, 1890. The chief read slowly. "Between the Freemen's Land Trust and the Sterling family estate." I turned to the crowd. They were silent again, listening to the history lesson that was about to destroy a dynasty. In 1890, my great-grandfather Samuel Graves, a man who was born into slavery but died a free landowner, bought this hill, I said. He knew the Sterlings wanted it for the view, but Samuel wouldn't sell. He hated your family, Constance. He hated what you stood for, so he leased it to you. A 99-year ground lease. I pointed to the document in the chief's hands. The lease expired in 1989, I continued. It had a 25-year extension clause. That extension expired in 2014. And finally, it had a 10-year grace period for the tenant to vacate or renegotiate if the owner could not be located. I looked at my watch. It was the Patek Philippe. I tapped the glass face. Today is October 14th, 2024. That grace period expired exactly 24 hours ago. Constance was shaking her head violently. No, that is impossible. My lawyers would have told me. Your lawyers are lazy, Constance, I said, and you are arrogant. You assumed the Graves family had died out. You assumed no one would come for the dirt. You were wrong. I turned back to the chief. Read the default clause, Chief. Paragraph 4. The chief looked down. His lips moved as he read the legalese. Then his face went pale. He looked up at Constance with pity. If the lease expires without renewal, he read, his voice shaking all improvements. Structures and fixtures erected upon the land shall revert immediately to the ownership of the land trust. I stepped closer to Constance. I leaned in so close she could smell the coffee on my breath. "That means this house is mine," I whispered. "That means the crystal chandelier above your head is mine. That means the stage you were standing on is mine. And that means you are standing in my living room uninvited." Constance stumbled back. She looked around the room as if the walls were closing in on her. She looked at the guests. She looked at the walls she had decorated, the floors she had polished. "You can't do this," she whimpered. "This is my home." "It was never your home," I said coldly. "You were just a squatter in a silk dress. You built a palace on borrowed dirt, and now the rent is due." I turned to the chief. "Chief Harrison, as the legal owner of this property, I am formally requesting that you remove these trespassers, and I want to file a report for vandalism. I believe this woman just threw a vase at my projection screen." The chief looked at Constance. He took a step back from her. He realized that the power had shifted. The money was gone. The reputation was gone. And now even the roof over her head was gone. He couldn't protect her anymore. "Constance," he said softly, "I think you need to come with us." "No." Constance screamed. She grabbed a champagne bottle from a nearby table and smashed it against the floor. "I am not going anywhere. This is my house. You work for me." Suddenly the front doors burst open again, but this time it wasn't the local police. A dozen men and women in windbreakers emblazoned with yellow letters swarmed into the room. They moved with a precision and speed that made the local cops look like amateurs. They carried assault rifles and wore body armor. Federal agents' voices boomed, "Everybody down." The crowd screamed and dropped to the floor. The waiters dove under tables. But I stayed standing. Luther stayed standing. And Constance stood there holding the neck of the broken champagne bottle, looking like a mad woman. Special Agent David Miller walked through the center of the formation. He walked straight up to me and nodded. "You called the cavalry," Winston Miller said. "We are here." He turned to Constance. He didn't show her any deference. He didn't care about her galas or her last name. Constance Sterling Miller announced, his voice carrying the weight of the United States Department of Justice. "You are under arrest." Constance laughed. It was a high manic sound, for what she screeched. "For trespassing. My lawyers will have me out in an hour." Miller shook his head. He pulled a folded warrant from his vest. "Not for trespassing, ma'am. We are arresting you for federal wire fraud involving the Sterling Heritage Foundation. We are arresting you for insurance fraud. And based on the evidence provided by Mr. Graves regarding the events of today, we are adding charges of attempted murder and conspiracy to commit murder." He signaled to his team. 2 agents moved in. Garrett Sterling Miller added, pointing to the weeping man in the corner, "You too. Accessory to attempted murder and conspiracy. Cuff him." Constance tried to run. It was a pathetic attempt. She took 2 steps toward the side exit before an agent tackled her. She hit the floor hard. Her blue velvet dress, already stained with wine, was now pressed against the cold marble she used to be so proud of. "Get off me!" she screamed as the agent pulled her arms behind her back. "Do you know who I am?" The handcuffs clicked. It was a sharp, metallic sound that cut through the sobbing and the murmuring of the crowd. It was the sound of finality. "We know exactly who you are," the agent said, hauling her to her feet. "You are prisoner number 84,902. They dragged her past me. Her hair was a mess. Her makeup was smeared. She looked at me with eyes full of pure madness. "I will kill you, Winston," she screamed. "I will kill you and that little bastard baby." I didn't flinch. I looked her dead in the eye. "You have the right to remain silent, Constance," I said calmly. "And for the first time in your life, I suggest you use it." They dragged her out the door, her screams fading into the night air. Garrett followed, his head hanging low, sobbing like a child. The ballroom was silent. The guests were slowly getting up from the floor, brushing off their tuxedos and gowns. They looked at me with fear. They looked at the man who had just dismantled the most powerful family in the county in under 20 minutes. Chief Harrison walked up to me. He looked shaken. "Mr. Graves," he said, I didn't know about the lease. Now you do," I said. I looked around the room. I looked at the opulence that had been built on the backs of my ancestors. "Chief," I said, "I want everyone out. I want this house empty in 10 minutes. And tell your men to post a guard at the gate. I don't want anyone looting my property." "Yes, sir," the chief said. He turned and started barking orders at the guests to clear the building. I walked over to Luther. He was smiling. It was a rare sight. "We did it," Luther said. "Grandpa's rule." We dug the ground out from under them, I agreed. I looked up at the giant screen. The video had stopped. The screen was blank. The show was over. Let's go get Zoe, I said. Let's bring her to her new home. We walked out of the ballroom, leaving the shattered glass and the shattered legacy behind us. The night air was cold, but for the first time in a long time it felt clean. The payoff was complete. The financial death was absolute. The legal death was sealed. The only thing left to do was to heal. The Virginia Spring has a way of washing the world clean. It has been 6 months since the night the handcuffs clicked around Constance Sterling's wrists, and 6 months since I watched the flashing lights of the federal convoy fade down the driveway. I am standing on the porch of a house that smells of fresh cedar and drying paint. It is not a mansion. It does not have marble columns or crystal chandeliers. It does not have a ballroom designed to make guests feel small. It is a home. It is a wide, sturdy structure built from timber and stone designed by my daughter Zoe. It sits on the exact same hill where the Sterling estate once stood. The mansion is gone. I did not sell it. I did not move into it. I had it demolished. It took 3 weeks for the bulldozers to tear down the walls that Constance had built to keep the world out. It took another week to clear the rubble. I wanted the earth to breathe again. I wanted the soil to see the sun after a century of being covered by arrogance. Now where the grand foyer used to be, there is a garden. Where the guest room prison used to be, there is a playground. The grass is growing back greener and thicker than before. It seems the land is happy to have its rightful owners back. I walk down the steps, my knees feeling better than they have in years. The heavy weight of the secret, the burden of the plan is gone. I am just a grandfather now. I knelt in the garden bed, plunging my hands into the dark, cool soil. This is the same dirt my great-grandfather Samuel Graves farmed. He was a man who knew the value of hard work. He knew that you cannot cheat the harvest. You reap what you sow. Constance Sterling sowed hate, and she harvested a prison cell. I sowed patience, and I harvested this peace. The sound of a screen door slamming made me look up. Zoe walked out onto the porch. She was not the pale, broken girl in the hospital bed anymore. She was radiant. Her hair was loose, catching the afternoon light. She was holding a bundle wrapped in a soft blue blanket against her chest. She looked at me and smiled a smile that reached her eyes and stayed there. "Daddy," she called out. "He is awake. He wants to see his grandpa." I wiped the dirt from my hands and walked up the steps. I looked down at the face of my grandson. We named him Samuel after the ancestor who gave us this ground. He has his mother's eyes and my chin. He is strong. He is healthy. He is perfect. I reached out a finger and his tiny hand wrapped around it. His grip was tight. He was a fighter just like his mother, just like his grandfather. A horn honked from the driveway. I looked up to see a black pickup truck rolling up the gravel path. It wasn't the surveillance van anymore. It was just a truck. Luther stepped out. He wasn't wearing his dark suit or his earpiece. He was wearing jeans and a flannel shirt, carrying a box of donuts in one hand and a giant stuffed lion in the other. "Uncle Luther," Zoe said, laughing. "He is too small for that lion. He will grow into it." Luther rumbled, his voice booming with a warmth that used to be hidden behind his professional exterior. "A Graves man needs a lion to guard his crib." Luther walked up the steps and clapped me on the shoulder. The impact was solid, reassuring. We sat on the porch swings, watching the sun dip lower in the sky. We drank coffee and ate donuts, the simple pleasure of it tasting better than any champagne I had ever tasted. "Did you hear from the lawyer?" Luther asked quietly, taking a bite of a glazed donut. "I did," I said, looking out over the hills. "The plea deal for Garrett was finalized yesterday." 5 years, Luther asked. 5 years in minimum security, I nodded. He testified against his mother. He gave them everything. The fraudulent accounts, the offshore shell companies, the bribes paid to the inspectors. He sold her out to save himself. It is fitting, really. He spent his whole life hiding behind her skirt, and in the end, he used her as a shield. And Constance, Luther asked. I took a sip of coffee. The name didn't make my blood boil anymore. It just made me feel a distant cold pity. "She was declared unfit to stand trial last week," I said. "The doctors say she has had a complete break from reality. She sits in her cell in the federal psychiatric facility and writes letters to people who don't exist. She writes to the governor. She writes to the president. She invites them to galas that aren't happening. She orders servants who aren't there to bring her wine. She is still living in her own world, Zoe said softly, looking down at Samuel. I agreed. She built a prison of lies in her mind long before the FBI put her in a real one. Now she is trapped in there forever. She thinks she is still the Queen of Virginia. She doesn't know she is just a number in a system she used to think she owned. It is better this way, Luther said. Let her live with her ghosts. We have living to do. He reached over and tickled Samuel's stomach. The baby let out a gurgle of delight. Victoria sent a gift, by the way, Zoe said. A silver rattle, and a note apologizing for not believing me sooner. Send it back, I said gently. We don't need their silver. We don't need their apologies. We have everything we need right here. Zoe nodded. She understood. We weren't building a life on the ruins of the Sterlings. We were building something new, something that didn't need their validation. I stood up and walked to the edge of the porch. I looked at the property line where the forest met the lawn. That was where I had found Zoe that night. That was where the nightmare had started. But the rain had washed away the blood. The sun had dried the mud. The cycle was complete. People talk about blood like it is a currency, I said, turning back to my family. Constance talked about dirty blood. She thought that because we came from slaves, because we worked with our hands, because our skin was dark, that we were less than her. She thought her blood was gold because it came with a title and a trust fund. I looked at Luther, the brother who stood by me when the world was dark. I looked at Zoe, the daughter who survived the fall and rose again. I looked at Samuel, the future. But she was wrong, I continued. Blood isn't about pedigree. It isn't about who your ancestors were married to. Blood is about what you are willing to bleed for. It is about loyalty. It is about showing up when the house is burning down and not leaving until everyone is safe. Constance had a family tree that went back to the Mayflower, but she died alone in a cage of her own making because she didn't understand love. She only understood possession. She wanted to own people. She wanted to own land. She wanted to own the future. But you cannot own the future, I said, touching Samuel's head. You can only guide it. You can only protect it. I took the baby from Zoe's arms. He was heavy, warm, and solid. I held him up so he could see the sunset painting the sky in purple and gold. This is your land, Samuel, I whispered to him, not because we took it, but because we earned it. Your great-great-grandfather broke his back on this soil so we could stand on it. Your mother broke her silence so you could be born on it. And your uncle and we broke the rules so you could keep it. Never let anyone tell you that you don't belong in a room, I told him. If they lock the door, you buy the building. If they build a wall, you build a table. And if they tell you your blood is dirty, you tell them that dirt is where the strongest trees grow. I turned back to the camera, breaking the fourth wall for the final time. The sun was gone now, and the first stars were appearing in the sky. The air was cool and sweet. That is the story of how a poor old man and his truck-driving brother took down an empire without firing a single shot. We didn't use violence. We used the truth. We used the law. And we used the one thing arrogant people always forget to check: the fine print. Justice is not always swift, and it is rarely fair. Sometimes you have to go out and make your own justice. You have to be patient. You have to be smart. And you have to be willing to play the fool until it is time to play the king. My name is Winston Graves. I am a father. I am a grandfather. And I am the landlord. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it reminds you that no matter how big the enemy seems, giants fall the hardest when you cut them off at the knees. If you have ever had to fight for what was yours, if you have ever been underestimated, or if you just enjoyed seeing a bully get exactly what they deserved, let me know in the comments below. Tell me which city you are watching from. I read every single one. And do me a favor, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps us share more stories like this. Stories about real people standing up to real darkness. Until next time, remember, the lease on a lie always expires eventually. Make sure you own the truth. Good night. What did I truly learn from this war? I learned that dignity is not something you buy with a trust fund. It is something you earn by standing tall when the world tries to force you to your knees. Constance Sterling believed that power came from a surname and a bank account, but she forgot that the strongest trees grow from the deepest roots. True power is not about controlling others. It is about protecting the ones you love with a quiet, unshakable strength. Money can build a mansion, but only love and loyalty can build a home that lasts forever. If this story inspired you to stand up for your family, or if you just enjoyed seeing justice served cold, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us grow. And tell me in the comments, what is the most valuable lesson your grandparents taught you? I read every single one. See you in the next story.